Breaking news, stunning allegations tonight against Roy Moore, the controversial Republican Senate candidate from Alabama. He is in a must-win race for Republicans. According to the Washington Post, a woman says Moore initiated a sexual encounter years ago when she was 14 and he was 32. That woman, Lee Korfman, claims Moore babysat her outside of a courtroom so her mother could attend a child custody hearing. Korfman says Moore asked her for her phone number and days later picked her up, took her to his home and kissed her. During a second visit, she says he took off her shirt and pants, removed his clothes, touching her and guiding her to touch him. And there are many very graphic and explicit details on this. Let's just say this again. She was 14 years old and you saw her picture. 3 other women have come forward to the Post, saying Moore pursued them when they were between the ages of 16 and 18. He was also in his 30s at that time. Numerous Republicans quick to call on Moore to step aside if the allegations are true. The latest just moments ago, Ted Cruz, who had endorsed Moore, and Senator John McCain saying Moore should step aside whether it's true or not, saying, quote, the allegations against Roy Moore are deeply disturbing and disqualifying. He should immediately step aside. But Moore's campaign rejected the allegations, calling them fake news. And just moments ago, Roy Moore himself doubled down, tweeting, quote, the Obama-Clinton machine's liberal media lapdogs just launched the most vicious and nasty round of attacks against me I've ever faced. We are in the midst of a spiritual battle with those who want to silence our message. The forces of evil will lie, cheat, steal, even inflict physical harm if they believe it will silence and shut up Christian conservatives like you and me. Martin Savage begins our coverage out front tonight in Gadsden, Alabama. And Martin, wow, that is a stunning rebuke of the allegations.
It is, but it's not out of character with Judge Roy Moore. I covered him many times when he was on the Alabama State Supreme Court. Not once, but twice. And he is a man who would take this as an affront, not just on himself politically, but on everything he stands for. He believes that this is really a fight and a cause. And this is just everything you would expect by standing up for what he believes is right. He's only going to dig in. This is the Etowah County Courthouse. This is, according to the Washington Post, and Lee Korfman, the youngest at the time, 14-year-old girl, says where she first met Roy Moore. It was inside here. She was on that bench that she just outlined. We came back to this town, Gadsden, to look for Lee Korfman, to talk to her, to get her to tell us the same story she's telling to the Washington Post. I knocked on her door. She wasn't home. Went to where she works. They say she wasn't there. She has right now just dropped out of sight. A neighbor I spoke to said that she is aware the media is looking for her and she does not want to talk, at least at this moment. So we're going to continue to knock on doors and continue to dig. But right now she is dropped out of sight. And
I know, the reporter from the Washington Post is going to talk to us in just a moment about these allegations. But you have had a chance, Marty, to talk to people in Alabama about whether this matters, right? On Capitol Hill, it's been pretty overwhelming. Even Ted Cruz, who endorsed him, said, if this is true, you're out. What are voters saying?
Right. Everybody knows that this has incredible implications and serious implications on what is already a dramatic campaign, a Senate race that has national consequences. A lot of the people, when I first approached them, they said they didn't know. They'd been working all day long. They hadn't heard about the story. So when I told it to them, they just look at you with this kind of expression of either they don't know whether to believe me or to believe the story they've just heard. Most of them said they didn't know what to make of it. Some of them clearly seem to be supportive of the young woman, who's now 53, but others are very much in support of the candidate. Tomorrow, everyone will know about it. Erin?
I certainly will. Thank you very much, Martin Savage, pursuing that story on the ground and out front now. One of the reporters who broke the story, Washington Post investigative reporter Beth Reinhardt. And Beth, I appreciate your time. So, look, your report is about 4 women, all teenagers at the time, making these accusations against Roy Moore. Let's talk about Lee Korfman, because she was 14 when she says Roy Moore approached her, initiating a sexual encounter with her. What does she say happened?
So she says she met Roy Moore in the courthouse in 1979. He was an assistant district attorney, and she was there with her mom for a child custody hearing. She says Roy Moore introduced himself, offered to watch her while the mom went into the courtroom, and then chatted with Lee, asked for her phone number, called her a few days later, picked her up around the corner from her house, drove her to his house in the woods, offered her alcohol, and they made he took her to his home twice. And on one of those occasions, she says he undressed, he took off her clothes, he touched her, and guided her hand to touch him.
And she was very explicit about what he was wearing. All those details, people can read your article to see them, but they are very explicit, right? She has a clear memory of this.
She does.
You talked to her, you talked to these other women, you've talked to the other people in their lives at the time who would know. You have run this down. And two questions for you on this. When did you start? When did you first hear it? And with all of this, I would imagine, Beth, that you clearly wouldn't have put this in the Washington Post if you did not believe it all to be true.
So it was roughly a month ago when a Washington Post reporter was in Alabama reporting another story when we started hearing these rumors at that time that Roy Moore had pursued teenage girls when he was assistant district attorney decades ago. Two of us spent weeks in Alabama chasing these leads down. When we first met the women who are quoted in the story, they were reluctant to speak on the record. They would only speak off the record. They know that Roy Moore is popular in Alabama and a powerful man, and they were worried about the repercussions. And it was only through multiple interviews that they agreed to speak publicly, and felt like they had to in order to show Alabama voters that there's another side to Roy Moore that they felt they needed to see.
Well, look, I mean, it's pretty shocking. 14 and look, that's pedophilia. Let's just be clear. Let's use the word for what it is. Beth, Roy Moore has told your paper that these allegations are completely false and are a desperate political attack by the National Democrat Party and the Washington Post on this campaign. And then that tweet, which I just read a couple moments ago, I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but it continued in the same vein, saying this is part of an attempt by forces of evil to lie, cheat, steal, and inflict physical harm to silence him. And he went on to mention, that this was about the liberal media and the Clintons. What do you say to that?
We spent a month working on this story. We thoroughly investigated everything that these women told us. In many of the cases, what they told us was corroborated by family members or friends. We vetted their backgrounds to see, did they have some kind of political vendetta against Roy Moore? That wasn't the case. And so, this was a story we took a lot of time with, and as we point out in the story, these women did not come to us seeking attention. We found them, and it was only through weeks of interviews that we felt our reporting was solid, and we were ready to publish the story.
All right. Well, Beth, thank you very much. Obviously, a lot of hard work went into that, so thank you so very much for that. And now let's go to the Alabama Secretary of State, John Merrill. And Secretary Merrill, I appreciate your time. What is your reaction, sir, to these incredibly damaging charges against Roy Moore?
Well, it's inappropriate for me to comment on the allegations that have been made simply because I wasn't involved in the investigation. And frankly, today, since I've had a firestorm of interviews that I've had to go through about what will happen if certain things occur in the process of ballot activity, and if Judge Moore can remain on the ballot, if the party wants to remove him. So I've been dealing with those things all through the day. But I just think it's interesting and a little odd that this story is now being introduced to the national media at this time in the campaign.
Now, these women are saying, though, you heard this, right, that they felt they had to come forward now because it is of such importance. And Lee Korfman, who was 14 when she says this happened, she's voted for Republicans in the past 3 elections. She voted for Donald Trump. She said she did almost come forward publicly in one of his Supreme Court, when he was campaigning for Supreme Court. She decided against it because her 2 children were in school, and she was worried it would be humiliating for them.
Yes,
she never donated any money to his challenger's campaign, to Luther Strange or anything like that. None of these women have. I mean,
yes, ma'am.
So are you comfortable really saying you just don't believe that a month of investigative work adds up, or what?
Well, no, I certainly didn't say that, and I can't say whether these allegations are true or whether they're false. I think that time will determine that, and I think as more information is introduced, it'll be clearer about what the true picture is regarding that.
So let me just ask you, Ted Cruz has said Roy Moore should obviously step aside if there's an ounce of truth in these allegations. Ted Cruz, of course, has endorsed him. He's not alone. Here are just 3 of at least 20+ senators today, Secretary Merrill, who have said the same thing publicly. Here they are.
If there is any shred of truth to these stories, he ought to step aside, and now.
Allegations, if true, to me, mean he needs to step aside.
If that's true, I don't believe there'd be any place for him in the U.S. Senate.
Now, I know, Secretary Merrill, that the ballot can't be changed this close to the election, right? You can't put another name on it,
That's
technically.
correct.
But do you believe Roy
Yes,
Moore
ma'am.
should withdraw from the race, as those gentlemen do, if this is true?
Well, yes, ma'am. That's certainly a decision that Judge Moore and Ms. Kayla and his entire family and his campaign team will have to make after consulting with a number of people who will probably have their opinion heard on whether or not they need to continue to advance their campaign. There's also other things that are under consideration, what the state party's position is on Judge Moore's nomination and exactly what should happen in that regard too. But the code and the Constitution of Alabama are very clear about his candidacy, and that is that Judge Moore will remain on the ballot as the Republican nominee because it's within that 76-day window that's prescribed in the code.
So you can't change it.
And that's according, yes ma'am, according to section 17-621, section B.
Let me just ask you, Secretary Merrill, though, you point out the state party, right? So the state party, the GOP, could request that you, the Secretary of State, disqualify a candidate on the ballot, right? Even if the candidate wants to stay in the race. So he say, obviously from his tweets, doesn't sound like he wants to go anywhere, but the party could come to you and say, we want him off. If they do that, they make that request to you, Secretary Merrill, will you honor it?
Yes, ma'am. Well, he would not be removed from the ballot, but then again, there's a number of other things that will follow a protocol if the party takes that permanent step. And if they do, we will adhere to their request and we'll honor their request as we should by law, and then we'll make sure that the proper adjudication of the process is adhered to as the election continues.
Do you agree that what he is alleged to have done, if true, is disqualifying?
Well, I think most of the people in the state of Alabama would be very disappointed if someone that had been alleged to have engaged in that type of activity, it had been proven that they had engaged in that activity, was continuing to represent them in any formal capacity.
Right. So that's, I mean, I know, I just want to get a clear answer here. So you're saying, yes, you would think that was disqualifying.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much, Secretary Merrill. I appreciate your time. Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
And tonight on CNN, don't miss a live town hall on sexual harassment hosted by Allison Camerata. It is tonight at 9. It's going to be fantastic. It's a must-watch with Allison tonight.